You're listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. Each week, your host, Polly Requa, interviews veterinarians and individuals in the pet industry from across the nation answering pet questions. Bark and Wag podcast is produced weekly for your enjoyment, and show notes can be found at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. That's BARKNWAG.com. Please remember to subscribe to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk.
Thank you for listening to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk. Bark and Wag is dedicated to protecting our dogs through advocacy, education, and supporting like-minded dog lovers by selling custom pet products. Bark and Wag is excited to announce our new partnership with a Colorado hemp farm to produce a line of CBD products for your pets. Bark and Wag has CBD pet tincture available in 300, 750, 1200, and 2400 milligrams. Bark and Wag CBD is pet safe, no THC, it's made in the USA, and is CO2 extracted. Please check out Bark and Wag's website, barkandwag.com. That is BARK, to see our line of CBD and awesome merchandise. We love pooch ideas for podcasts and merchandise, so anytime send an email to Polly at barkandwag.com with your suggestions.
Welcome to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk. I'm your host, Polly Requa. Today we're talking to Dr. Laura Brown, owner of Green Tree Animal Hospital in Libertyville, Illinois. Welcome, Dr. Brown.
Good morning, Polly.
Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. I received an email from my doggy daycare that the cough, an influenza cough, is hitting the canine community. And so I wanted to have you on to talk about what is the cough and what can we do to protect our dogs?
Okay, sounds good. Good. I'm glad to hear your daycare was proactive and sent you out a letter, because this cough is, we're going to call it a mystery respiratory illness, because nobody has really identified exactly what virus it is. Currently, that's the thinking, that it's a virus similar to kennel cough, right? Everybody vaccinates their dog to go to daycare or boarding and grooming for kennel cough, and depending on where you live, potentially influenza, which is also another respiratory disease in dogs. Do you have to vaccinate, Polly, for your daycare?
Yes.
Okay, for both those, right? Okay. And also in the distemper vaccine, which is a combo vaccine for dogs, it's distemper with parainfluenza in there. So there's another component in that combo vaccine that protects for respiratory illness as well. But just like all viruses, not every vaccine is 100%. So hopefully being vaccinated will help give your dogs better immunity, even if they do get exposed to one of the viruses that they're vaccinated for. But this new thing potentially doesn't have a vaccine. So the key things to remember are, one, have your dog as up to date on vaccines as they can be, and careful at the places that dogs congregate in large groups, especially daycares and groomers and boarding, because they're in enclosed spaces, not like the dog park where it's fresh air and open air and all of that stuff. But those daycare places are all a bunch of dogs together sharing their respiratory secretions. So the main thing to watch for is the start of a cough. So kennel cough has traditionally been this loud, kind of barky, croupy cough, but the dogs don't seem sick despite the cough. So no fevers, they still are active, they're still eating, potentially cough more when they get excited, but in about a week to 10 days, they usually, get better and are back to normal. This new thing potentially has coughs that start like that, but linger for weeks to months. Sometimes we try antibiotics because there can be a secondary bacterial infection that can happen and cause problems if your immune system's being taken down by a virus. But I guess this new one, and where I practice in Illinois, we haven't seen that we know of anything this significant, but can progress to a significant case of pneumonia. And those dogs can be super sick and sometimes die. And usually they die in a short amount of time. Like it goes from 0 to 60 and they're pretty sick and they don't make it.
Wow.
Yeah. So like kind of a range from mild to severe in between.
So one of my friends that I play tennis with, her Great Dane got it. And what's interesting is he wasn't at daycare.
No, what did he go?
I don't know. I'm not sure what, but somehow he got it. And I guess the barrel chest dogs have more of an issue.
Well, the thing of Great Dane, he's ginormous and he's really deep chested too. So potentially if you get an infection down in those lungs, it will be difficult to clear. The other breeds would be pugs, like the short nose, small nostrils, what we call them brachycephalics, that, snorty little squished up faces. Just it's harder for them to clear their respiratory secretions normally, right? Then they get a little bit of an infection on top of that, makes it 10 times worse.
Okay.
So I hope the biggest takeaway for me is for people to, hopefully, I had a conversation with my groomer because she does grooming and has, open, all the dogs just mill about, no cages or anything like that. And in Illinois, where we're at, once again, we haven't seen any crazy case numbers. I know Colorado's on the top of the list when you look up the statistics. Started in Oregon was another spot where there was some significant numbers, but it's just about being kind of extra diligent, and hopefully your places where dogs all congregate are taking a little bit of extra precaution for, even though I'm sure everybody's clean as it is, but washing bowls every day in between, sterilizing as best you can, air fresheners. If people's dogs are coughing, do not let them come in. Or if your dog is coughing, don't go to daycare. If you've been to the kennel and then all of a sudden, your dog's been at the kennel, I wouldn't take them to the groomer for a couple of days to make sure if there's an incubation period. There is an incubation period. We're not sure how long, 1 to 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't take your dog around if your dog's coughing.
And how do you decipher, so obviously I have a pug because I'm pug crazy.
Right.
So Oliver came inside and it's super cold here and had a little bit of, it sounded like, a cough, like he was trying to, it was croupy almost.
Like a snorty?
Yeah.
Croupy, yeah.
And so if it continues, that's when I would go see a vet?
Yeah, so if cough plus lethargy, doesn't want to eat, snotty, boogery stuff's coming out, fever, and this would be a good time to plug for people to try and learn how to take their own dog's temperature at home. A fever over 102.5 to 103, anything over 103 at home at rest is a fever.
Okay.
So that's a big red flag. And like I said, not eating, lethargy. If it's significant pneumonia, dogs will really be struggling to breathe. And you can see that as you watch them lay there. Everybody should take a peek at their dog at resting. And when you stare at their chest, it's really hard to see them take a breath if they're normal.
Okay.
If you can stare at your dog at rest and you can see their chest and or belly moving, that's a bad sign. If their belly's moving at the same time, different than their chest, they're really struggling to get air.
Okay.
And that's a little too late to be going.
Okay.
You need to go, but those dogs probably need hospitalization and oxygen and stuff like that. So obviously, here's the hard part for veterinarians is we don't have a great test to tell what is viral and what's bacterial for respiratory infections. We take x-rays when we're worried about pneumonia to see lungs on x-rays, and we listen with our stethoscope, we take temperatures, and depending on how the dog is, if it's a virus, if we're suspecting a virus, we're not going to send home antibiotics because that's a whole nother topic about antibiotic stewardship and not overdoing it when it's really not necessary.
Okay.
So, and if it's a virus, antibiotics don't kill viruses.
Yeah.
Right. So if you get a secondary bacterial infection because your immune system's compromised, then you may need antibiotics. But then which one? That's been the struggle for veterinarians is some of these pneumonias have not responded to the traditional broad spectrum, good respiratory antibiotics that we normally choose have not touched these pneumonias. So that's why some of these dogs are getting pretty sick.
Okay. Yeah. So Winston, our golden, does agility class, and they've taken down all the bowls. Like you have to bring your own bowl to have the dog have water. So,
I mean, there's a little bit of a parallel if you think about it to COVID.
Sure.
And you know what I mean? Like people and what we did during the worst of that about isolating and masking and hand washing and not going inside to restaurants and things like that, you know? I mean, I this isn't COVID, but I'm just saying, if you think about the precautions that we took, you know, it's not a wrong thing to just be a little more diligent. About that stuff, to try and, especially if your dog, you know, like they said with COVID, if you're immunocompromised, if you have asthma, blah, 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 you guys are at higher risk. So deep chested dogs, little tiny pugs, old dogs that are, you know, potentially on, dogs get immunocompromised because they're in cancer treatment or treatment for immune mediated diseases. So if they're on drugs like prednisone and things like that, they should definitely not be going to these high risk multi-dog hangout places.
Yeah. And you know, it hit right when everyone was going away for Christmas break. So like a lot, I mean, we were all like in a panic. So I used Rover just because I didn't want, I mean, and we were going overseas. And so the last thing I wanted was the dogs to get sick. And then, I mean, I can't do anything.
Right. If you're the daycare, think about the daycare or the kennel situation. If they need to have some ways to isolate, but if it gets started in their situation, they're in trouble. And like, to your point, if people are out of town, how are they going to come get them?
Yeah. So,
you know, and like you said, busy season, right? For everybody.
Yeah.
And, you know, no chance to be outside and get fresh air and kill all the bugs and germs and stuff like that.
Yeah. So dog owners just have to be on the lookout. I like the fact that you explained how to tell if your dog isn't feeling well based on the breathing techniques.
Yeah. And that's a lot of that is just looking at when they're normal and getting really comfortable with what normal breathing looks for them. And then when they're coughing, if they're sick in any other way, you know, then that's another red flag. Not eating, lethargy, coughing up stuff, or snotty boogers or fevers. And that's another really important thing. I know nobody likes to think about trying to take their dog's temperature, but you take your kid's temperature and they don't like that either, baby's temperatures. And it's a training thing, you know, give them a treat and lube up the thermometer and use a regular old people thermometer, and it just becomes designated for the dog after that time. And then anything over 103 at rest is a problem. And that's going to make your dog feel crappy too. Just like when you have a fever, you're lethargic, you don't feel good, right? Yep. Dogs same.
Well, thank you for all the tips. And we look forward to having you back on the podcast.
Sounds good. Thanks, Polly.
Thank you for listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, www.barkandwag.com, to your friends and other pet owners. Have a pressing question for a veterinarian? Ask your question at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. This has been a KFR production. Join us next time for another edition of Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk.